Hey everyone, okay, so the day is finally here. We are gonna do our first roast along video at Zogio Coffee and Provisions. So welcome, thank you for tuning in. So I'm just gonna do a really quick rundown of what I would maybe call like roasting basics, but also like my perspective and my style and how I apply things to my roasts and why I do what I do to a certain degree. So we'll just quickly run through the roast. And I'll let you all know what I'm gonna do in this next roast and what I just do in general in roasting. So for my warm-ups, I'm gonna do a 20-minute warm-up on the machine, and I'm roughly gonna use like mid-gas. Mid-gas, that would be like mid-gas on your machine, middle somewhere, you know what I mean? Not high, not low, somewhere in the middle. So I'm gonna use middle gas. I'm gonna use low airflow for the first 15 minutes. Then I'm gonna click it up to medium airflow just to get more air into the system. You really wanna heat up your whole entire system. And that would include your ductwork going up to the roof. So we wanna bring up the airflow system so we can bring more energy to the full roasting system. Then we'll run medium airflow for like 5 minutes. At that point, I'll evaluate where we are with temperature, and I might keep the warm up going because I always wanna basically hover 20+ degrees above the charge temp for the next roast. That's the system I've developed on the IR that I'm using, and it works really well for me. So there might be a little bit of like between batch protocol for me, which is something I haven't done a lot in the past. And basically what that between batch protocol is bringing the airflow basically back to what it would be low airflow through the drum. So we go back to low airflow through the drum between batch, and then I bring my gas back to that medium gas, and I bring the temperature 20 degrees above the charge temp for the next charge, the next roast. That's my routine batch protocol. At that point, I turn off the gas, but I do preset the gas to my initial gas setting for the next roast, because then it just saves me a little bit of work in that really fast, quick moment. And then I turn the airflow. If I've had the airflow adjusted anywhere higher than low, I turn the airflow back to low. And then I let the machine naturally come down to the charge temp. And then I charge at that moment. So that's my warm up. That's a little bit of my between batch protocol, and that's basically how I prep the machine for the charge. Cool. All right, so for this coffee, we're actually gonna do a pre-blend, which I'll get more into the roast, the beans, and what we're doing in that video. But for this one, we're gonna do a 420 charge. So 420 charge, 420 degrees on the BT probe, which is on the, basically on the readout screen on the machine. Low airflow, no gas. That's pretty much how I start every roast. We'll have a charge temp, we'll have the air set to low, and we'll have the gas off. And then we'll turn on the gas at a certain point into the roast at a certain level to get the energy going as we want, and then we'll see how the roast progresses. And then at that point, we kind of need to be flexible so that we can make sure that roast sticks to the plan that we want to do. All right, cool. Other basics. I'm always gonna start out with the highest gas. The first gas setting will be the highest gas setting. This is kind of roaster basic stuff, and then as you progress through the roast, you lower your gas settings, basically. Although when you do dark roasts that go far into like development, you sometimes bring it up a little bit at the end of the roast, in the development phase. So there could be a subtle increasing of gas in a long dark roast. But other than those, you're pretty much always just going down in gas. So the first gas setting I say will be the highest, and then after that I'll bring the gas down to gain control of the roast as the coffee starts to progress through the phases. I'm gonna call the first phase the dry phase. I'm gonna call the second phase the mid phase, and I'm gonna call the last phase the development phase. That's just the words that I'm gonna use. I'm not sure the exact words that the industry is using right this second. That's what I'm gonna use, just to be clear moving forward. I'll call up green to yellow. You know what I mean? You're gonna hear me call out green to yellow. That's the transition where the coffee goes from mostly green to yellow. You know what I mean? Everyone has a little different ratio, variance, whatever For me, I call out yellow when all the beans are yellow and there is no more green. The green is gone. So that means that the bean that turns yellow first will probably be more than yellow. But I do it on the last bean, or the bean that turns yellow last. That's when I make my call green to yellow. And I probably even chime out a temperature if I can. At that point, that is usually right around that pre-post that event is usually when I increase my airflow from low to medium. That's just kind of a natural progression. It's very classic, I want to say. I did not invent this. This is me building on the knowledge of many roasters before me. And at that point, we'll probably bring our gas down, we'll gain some control. A lot of times in my roasts, I try and extend the mid phase a little bit, which it takes a little bit of gas manipulation or energy input manipulation, because you got to kind of bring it down to then extend that phase, because you tend to go into the mid phase with a lot of momentum from that early phase. And sometimes that momentum is perfect and you can just ride it out right to your first crack, but sometimes you have to actually bring down the gas, sometimes even aggressively, just to get the time in mid that you need and want. And that's an important thing, you know what I mean? So for me, roasting is kind of like, there's like two things, you know what I mean? There's the energy and the temperature, and then there's the time. And those two things are what create the cup. Short roasts have a different cup than long roasts. Dark roasts have a different cup than light roasts, or you know, however you want to call it. But that is the big game we're playing. It's time and it's temperature, and it's how we apply time and temperature to each phase over the overall roast profile. So that's basically what we're gonna be doing. I probably will bring up my air to the highest air setting right when I hear an outlier. That's something that I kind of started doing quite a long time ago, because when you hear an outlier, that means that you're getting closer to first crack. And so for me, at first crack, we have a lot of stuff going on in the drum. It's probably the most chaotic time in the drum. So to increase the airflow, that just means that there's a little bit more stuff leaving the drum because we're increasing the airflow. And so I think that kind of creates a little more clear window view into what's going on in the drum. Plus it also removes a lot of chaff, which chaff is happening, but then there's also that first pop, which is releasing moisture that can kind of throw the thermocouples into some wackiness. So by creating some higher airflow, you can kind of remove some of that. And I feel like it just kind of makes the profile a little bit easier to read, and it's a little bit easier to see what's going on in the beans. Because in your development phase, it's super important, the ending, the development phase will really dictate what the cup is like. You know what I mean? So it's really important to gain control and knowledge about what's actually happening in your development phase. So for me, increasing my airflow to the high setting at outlier means that as the beans start to pop, that there's a little bit more removal of the moisture and things like that. Plus, those beans are also giving off a lot of smoke at that time. And so running the airflow higher, you're gonna make the cup, or you're gonna make sure you keep your cup clean. So, but that's not always the thing. You might wanna stifle the airflow at that point if you're doing the old school Frenching that roasters used to do back when I first started. We're not gonna talk about that so much, but that's a thing too. Okay, at that point, usually I will have really low gas settings to no gas. There's many a time where my profile has plenty of momentum into crack and I turn the gas off. And at that point, I don't really manipulate airflow because we already do our high, and at that point, you're just kind of letting it rise is kind of what I say. So roasting is a lot about setup. You have to kind of, in a way, what I used to say, I think, is you have to be in your moment, but then you also have to be jumping into the future a little bit and kind of pre-predicting where you're going, you know what I mean? So you know, and that's where rate of rise becomes an important piece of the puzzle, because rate of rise tells you how many degrees you're going per minute. Also, for me, rate of rise will always be degrees in Fahrenheit per minute. I apologize, Celsius team. I want to get there someday, but I'm just not there yet. I'm degrees in Fahrenheit per minute for rate of rise. That helps you know where you're going. You know, how long does it take you to get from Chattanooga to Nashville? Well, I guess it depends on traffic, but it's also going to depend on your speed. So rate of rise is kind of our speed, so we know how fast we're going, where we're going to get, when we're going to get there. Okay, I'm always going to have a drop temp, so I'm going to have basically I have a time in dry phase, I have a time in mid phase, and then I have a time in development to a degree. So a lot of times I'll do development as plus a certain amount of time, plus a certain amount of degrees from crack. That's the easiest way for me to classify the development phase. Mid phase is just an overall time thing, because you never really know exactly where things are going to change temperature-wise. And the dry phase is also a time thing. You know what I mean? So we're really going to look for a certain amount of time in dry, a certain amount of time in mid, and a very specific certain amount of time in development, but also only moving a certain amount of degrees from crack. That's super important, right? Yeah, it is. We'll talk about that in much greater detail as time goes on. So I'm going to have an exact degree I want to drop this bean at a certain development time. Cooling time should be pretty simple. Cooling isn't really a complicated thing. I always like to smooth. I don't run my agitators constantly. That creates, it slows cooling time down a little bit. So I'll run the agitators to remove the hot spots, then I smooth the beans, and I let the beans run for probably 2 minutes. Then I run the agitators, then I smooth the beans, rinse and repeat. Usually I can get the cooling done in about 4 minutes. Large weights are going to be variant. This is a 12 kg Diedrich, but right now, for our coffee need for the business, it's not a lot because we're just starting the business. So I'm going to be roasting different charge weights, and I'll be really good about telling you the charge weight at the start of the roast, because that has a huge impact into the thermodynamics of your machine, for sure. What percentage of overall you're using. It's always best to use the same charge weights. I don't have that ability right now because we're selling coffee and it's always a little different, but I'll let you know the charge weight of the charge before we do it. I think that's most of the basics. I don't think there's too much there to cover. I'm gonna do the warm up here and then we'll get into that roast and we'll knock it out and hopefully it'll be successful. All right, cool. Cheers, thanks for listening.